a lot of people are down on Melvin Carter. It's got me thinking, if he picked more fights with the city council, I know there have been battles between him and the St. Paul City Council, but not to the degree that Mayor Fry picks fights with the Minneapolis City Council. I think he would be well served to have a nemesis. Like, who is Melvin Carter's nemesis? I can't think of anyone. There is no one for him to blame for his troubles. And so people think it's the strong mayor's fault in St. Paul, whereas we don't have that in Minneapolis. There is no accountability for our mayor in any way because he's got a nemesis. Is Melvin Carter considered getting a nemesis? What do you think about my idea?
We should get him on the phone. We should get him on speaker, John, and we should see what he would say. I think
Melvin, if you're listening, call in.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
My wife and I are currently living in a hotel near Bad Weather Brewing because our house almost burnt down 10 days ago.
I'm sorry for forgetting that. That's traumatic. And I had forgotten I saw your post thanking the St. Paul Fire Department.
When something like that happens, partly you want people to be generally aware of it or whatever, but partly it's so annoying and like there's so many insurance calls and I'm doing so much stuff that half the time talking about it is annoying, but you also like people deserve to know. So it's a weird tension point of like saying the same stuff over and over and over.
I'm very sorry. When are you going to be able to restore yourself to normal?
It'll be like a full gut job. So like to get back into our actual house will be like 9 months to a year, but we'll eventually be in like temporary housing. You know, we're going through the loop-de-loops of like insurance hires a company to find you housing. You can't do it yourself. They have to do it. And it's all just like, whatever, you know?
That's awful.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that this is happening to you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. It's pretty wild. We just remodeled like our upstairs bathroom last year and spent money doing that. And then
and you're laughing through it. You're laughing through the pain.
Nothing to do, but just, thrive.
Okay. So let's talk about St. Paul ballot question 1. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Joining me today is former Ward 4 City Council member Matt Privratsky.
Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about some very nerdy policy ordinance questions on people's ballots.
And so this kind of been bubbling up through, I think it came up in the Molly Coleman episode. She talked about it, kind of blew my mind, but we didn't go too deep into it. And then somebody from St. Paul texted me and was like, hey, you need to talk about this. This is important and it might slip through the cracks. And it's about allowing St. Paul to implement what are known as administrative citations or civil fines for, well, I'll ask you, like, what kinds of violations would administrative citations apply to?
Yeah, I'm glad you're covering it and I'm glad you're talking about it. I'm part of a coalition of folks who are trying to spread the word about why this is important. And I think the first thing to say is, no regular person would have ever heard of this. Like they would have never heard the phrase administrative citations. I had never heard of it before working at City Hall, as a legislative aide. And it's important because it's just such a common sense tool. It's so common sense that people don't even know we don't have it because the vast majority of towns in Minnesota have it. The vast majority of major metro centers across the country have it. And so essentially right now, St. Paul is handcuffed by enforcing its local ordinances, its local laws, only through criminal methods. And what that means is we're sort of always hoping and praying that people agree to follow our ordinance. Because the truth is a city is never going to take someone to court over a basic day-to-day violation because of the resources it takes, because you're criminalizing that person. Um, so for folks who are politically active and politically interested, they might not even know that many of the foundational new policies St. Paul has passed in the last decade actually are built to be enforced through administrative citations because the city has known that it needs to add this tool. We just haven't been able to get it into our city charter. And so, for example, minimum wage, earn sick and safe time, tenant protections, rent stabilization, wage theft, like all these things that our community has agreed are foundational values and protections we want on the books, all are reliant on administrative citations to be in place to be fully enforced. And so, it's good that we now have this opportunity on the ballot. It's a little frustrating because actually the city council passed it unanimously earlier this year. The charter commission already supported it. The mayor already signed it. But then enough signatures were gathered. Yeah,
we shouldn't even be talking about it. Because when it's
Right.
unanimous at the city council, it's non-controversial. Everyone agrees this is the appropriate thing to do. Voters shouldn't even have to have it on their minds. And one of my other question is like, who is behind the petition that put this on the ballot? Because when I heard there was I assume it's a group. I have no idea if there's an entity behind this or one cranky person. Like, what is their motivation? Because it sounds bad. Whatever their motivation is, sounds bad to me.
Yeah, folks might remember. So the gentleman who led the effort most directly was Peter Butler, and people might remember him if you're a hardcore local news guy, local news person. He's the guy that also got the question on the ballot to switch St. Paul to even year elections, to presidential year elections. So, and that ballot measure, in my perspective, was unfortunately successful, but it's in place now. It's going forward, and so that same person is who worked to get it on the ballot. Get this on the ballot this year. And as you said, it's pretty frustrating only because for all of the hubbub about like how St. Paul City Council and mayor are working together and there's multiple candidates for mayor. Both major candidates for mayor have already supported this. Like the entire city council already voted in support of this. This is the most non-controversial political thing I've ever worked on in my time in St. Paul by far. It's easily the most non-controversial thing. And yeah, we wish it wouldn't have to be on the ballot, but it is. And so when folks see city question 1, just know you should vote yes.
Why is St. Paul the kind of libertarian Mad Max free-for-all where nobody ever thought to implement an enforcement mechanism like this? Because you've mentioned a lot of other places already have this. I would have assumed St. Paul has this. It's a surprise to me St. Paul doesn't. Like, what's going on? What's going on in St. Paul that this hasn't? We're 2025 and we're waiting for this to be implemented.
Yeah, Rick Barco, who's on the Charter Commission, and so has dealt with this issue for a long time, because folks may not remember, when I was a legislative aide to then council member Micho Jalali, it actually almost came to us back then. And so it was being discussed in the 2018, 2019, 2020 timeframe. But the issue is the city council has to approve these changes, the charter changes. So if folks aren't familiar, a city charter is basically like a city's constitution, and cities' laws are basically their ordinances are basically their laws. And we actually have to amend our charter to allow these laws to exist. And back then, one council member didn't want it passed, and so that meant it got killed. Like every council member for charter changes has a veto card, and someone used it back then. And so
who did that?
Jane Prince.
Oh, jeez. I guess that's who I would have guessed it was.
Yeah. And so, for example, when you ask who's opposed to this, there was a recent op-ed put together by Peter Butler, who I mentioned did the signatures, Jane Prince, and then Patty Hartman, who, and so those three, if folks are curious about who's opposing this, it's sort of folks like that.
And the type of people who were against like organized trash collection, was Jane Prince against that?
I think she was at least adjacent to that concern. Yeah.
I don't have really clear memories of this, but I vaguely remember Patty Hartman being a part of the anti-organized trash.
I think, this is also not a partisan issue, and it has nothing to do with like left or right, but Yeah, Patty, I think, is known as being a somewhat conservative voice, like in St. Paul circles. And
Well, in
um,
Minneapolis, we call that being moderate. I think that's the politically
that's right.
correct way to say conservative.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So I was reading the City of St. Paul website on this topic,
Hmm.
and they're pushing it as an alternative to criminal citations. And this anecdote like blew my mind. One
Hmm.
resident lost their job as a bus driver after a background check flagged a citation from the city, not for a violent offense, but for failing to paint their house in time. So,
Hmm.
seems like a good reason to have this as an option, as an alternative to a criminal citation. Just civil fine. If you've done a painting violation, maybe you shouldn't lose your job over that.
Yeah, one good comparison, like that's a really good one way I describe administrative citations is right now our enforcement tools are either too blunt or too gentle. And the one you just brought up is an example of it being way, way too blunt, like way too damaging. And, another one I would give is right now, when a landlord, for instance, is either mistreating like a family or a small business that they're hosting in their space, one of the only ways we can enforce rules against landlords right now is to revoke their certificate of occupancy. But that means to enforce action against a poorly behaving landlord, you have to kick a family out of their house or you have to
Right.
kick a small business out of their space. And we saw this downtown recently. I believe it's either the Alliance Bank or US Bank when Madison Equities went under and they weren't paying their bills and they weren't doing their upkeep. There was nothing the city could do to enforce them keeping those buildings up except to revoke the C of O, which would mean people have to leave their space and their entire world is turned upside down. And as Rebecca Naker, Council President Rebecca Naker brought up a great example recently where even keeping the skyways open, like having consistent skyway hours, things like that are literally unenforceable because the city's never going to take a building owner to court over it because it doesn't make sense. And to your point, even if the city wants to take people to court, then all of a sudden you're over criminalizing all these people for minor offenses. So for folks who are sort of wedge followers like I am, the good analysis I give is remember all the discussion for years we had at the state level to try and get transit fare enforcement to be administrative and civil versus criminal. So that you don't have to send literal police officers to just check if someone paid their ticket. You can send, community focused staff. You don't have to you don't have to spend law enforcement resources on making sure people paid, blah, blah, blah. And that's a recent example where, that passed, I think, with bipartisan support at the state level. That's how broadly accepted it is that we should have these civil penalties instead of criminal.
Is there a rebuttal to the idea this is a cash grab? This is going to target low income residents? What do we say to that?
Yeah, that's been one of the criticisms. I want to give the city council a lot of credit. This is before I was there earlier this year when Mitra Jalali was still council president. Back then, council member Bowie and many others were concerned that this could be a tool that's used to discriminate against under-resourced folks, to target folks who, already have been, left behind with all of our systems and resources. And they put protections in place so that when each ordinance is created, it has to follow certain steps to make sure it's done equitably. So, for example, all of the ordinances I mentioned previously, so tenant protections, minimum wage, wage theft laws, those ordinances were already shaped very intentionally to make sure the way they used administrative citations were done carefully. And what the council did this year is make sure that when new versions of administrative citations exist in certain parts of the ordinances, they have to be done equitably. They have to take into account how it's going to be used, who it's going to be targeted. Because the truth is, this is not incredibly comfortable for city people to have to say. The truth is right now, the city is already able to over punish vulnerable people if they wanted to today. Like you can charge people to clean up their yard, you can like do aggressive abatement orders. But to your point, right now our current system, if the city does that, and hopefully the city never does, if they do that, they're creating not just penalties in the moment but criminal penalties versus being able to make sure that any penalties that do go aren't criminal. So there is some hesitation just to make sure it's fully equitable, but I think the steps have been taken to ensure that that's the case for sure.
Okay, so it's question 1 on your ballot, and you're voting yes for this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. The yes would mean that the city is allowed to pursue administrative citations or civil fines. Yep.
And is it going to pass? It seems like it should pass. You worried at all?
I Well, I think awareness is the only issue. So folks have probably rarely heard about this. We're trying to spread the word in the media. We're trying to talk to folks like you who have super engaged followers who will help spread the word to others. I will say anyone who's listening to this, anyone who's watching this, if you know anyone in St. Paul, just like shoot a few texts off and just say, "Hey, I heard administrative citations. Question 1 is a good idea." For context for folks, the ballot this year is really lean. So we have a mayor's race going on. That's gotten some coverage. We have a question about the school funding referendum. And then there's this question. So there's only going to be a few things on there for you to research. And so, yeah, it'll be city question 1, and then there's a school question 1. So, yeah, 3 things to vote
Oh,
on this year.
and they're both question 1, just in different categories.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it worded clearly? Because sometimes that is a problem where it's worded in a way that's like, is this nefarious? I can't tell.
It's a little bit long, but as you and your followers will be familiar, unfortunately, a lot of these ballot questions have to be long because they're sort of speaking in charter language speak, they're speaking in ordinance speak, and so it is a little bit lengthy. But to be honest, I think almost all these ballot questions are a little bit lengthy. So I think if you read it carefully, like you will understand what it's saying the city should be able to do. But I also think most people living their daily lives would never have heard the phrase before. So even though you can comprehend the question, like it's helpful to have background for sure.
Do you think the schools referendum thing is going to pass? Because
I would assume the schools will pass. I think for folks who don't follow St. Paul, like labor negotiations, the district and the teachers union, the educators union did a really, really good job getting an agreement early. So it was the first time in several negotiating cycles that they got a deal done without having to strike. They got a deal done without having to even vote to strike. So I think huge props to St. Paul Public Schools and the St. Paul Federation of Educators for getting that done. And then the other thing about getting done early is now they've been able to advocate shoulder to shoulder in favor of their referendum, which I personally am supporting. Obviously, folks who are advocating for administrative citations is a separate thing, but I'm personally supportive of both. I think they're both really common sense measures, and it's tough to ask people to get engaged politically right now. It sort of sucks to get engaged politically right now. I feel that super hard. Like I'm sure people are trying to just have an escape and not deal with more political stuff. But the truth is, all 3 of the things on our ballot this year, the mayor's race, both these ballot questions are really straightforward, but also really, really important. And so, any way you're able to help your friends and family and folks get engaged is just super necessary and super helpful.
I don't have the money as a news organization to do public opinion polling, but what I do
Right.
is I take the temperature of the St. Paul subreddit. And
Yeah.
as I have noted on this podcast previously, surprisingly like anti-Mayor Carter and also against the schools referendum, it's like too many taxes. Our taxes have gone up enough.
hmm
I believe there have been school referendums before to raise money for the schools, and people feel put upon by just the constant taxation. And
Yep.
people in the subreddit who are supportive of it are like, no, this is actually like the state is underfunding the schools. We need to do this. We're trying to tread water here.
It's tough too, and I get it. I mean, my wife and I have a house in Midway. Like I understand how much my property taxes have gone up. I understand how much other folks their property taxes have gone up. Um, I will just say the truth is like the amount you pay in your property taxes is so is influenced by so much more than just the referendum votes and the property tax levy votes. Property taxes are almost entirely dictated by how much you're actually driving growth in your property tax base. Like one way I describe it is when folks vote on the levy at the end of the year, like when the school board, the city council, when a mayor proposes a levy increase, you're really tweaking around the edges. Like you're deciding how much frosting is on the cake, but most of the cake is already baked based on how much growth there's already been, whether you're driving economic development, whether you're getting new apartment buildings, new hotels, like new office buildings. And so it's just been a really tough time for downtowns across the country, and for all major cities, it's been a really tough time, with property tax burden. And St. Paul is not immune from those challenges. But I honestly think, the best way you can, like, people can keep their own personal property taxes low is supporting elected officials and supporting governments that will invest in that kind of development. Like, are we making sure new investment is coming downtown? Are we making sure new investment is happening around the soccer stadium? Like, are we making sure the West Rock, industrial paper recycling plant can be repurposed so that we're getting strong tax base there too? And I understand why, folks who have really tight means, it's tough to vote for a levy, knowing that it'll increase your taxes. But I do think in the long run, it's what our families deserve. It's what our students deserve. I remember the school levy referendum is about the equivalent of about $20 a month. And so it's not nothing. But I also think it is a reasonable investment for a typical homeowner to make sure that our kids are getting everything they need, in our schools.
Another thing I'm picking up from the St. Paul subreddit is, at least among those people, a lot of people are down on Melvin Carter. It's got me thinking, if he picked more fights with the city council, I know there have been battles between him and the St. Paul City Council, but not to the degree that Mayor Fry picks fights with the Minneapolis City Council. I think he would be well served to have a nemesis. Like, who is Melvin Carter's nemesis? I can't think of anyone. There is no one for him to blame for his troubles. And so people think it's the strong mayor's fault in St. Paul, whereas we don't have that in Minneapolis. There is no accountability for our mayor in any way because he's got a nemesis. Is Melvin Carter considered getting a nemesis? What do you think about my idea?
We should get him on the phone. We should get him on speaker, John, and we should see what he would say. I think,
Melvin, if you're listening, call in.
Right. That's right. He's listening live. I personally, my view of like the challenges St. Paul has faced in the last 8 years with Melvin as mayor, I personally think almost everything we've faced as a city is similar to what other major metropolitan cities have faced. Like when we dealt with shutdown and the deep quarantine eras of COVID, when we dealt with how that shifted downtown property values and the value of office buildings, the need for office buildings. When we've dealt with now some challenges at the state level, some challenges at the federal level, even like the fentanyl crisis, the things that I see St. Paul dealing with, and even the Twin Cities dealing with, I don't see much there that's unique to St. Paul. I see a lot that's true for almost every major metro area in the country. And I think it's really, really hard when you're a local municipal leader and you're downstream of everything that happens in the world and the country and the state. You have really limited opportunity to drive change. Like there are certain things you control. You control your zoning. You control like how you design your streets. You control things like density and how you're spurring density. And you can do some things to drive investment and redevelopment. And those are the things that I've always been passionate about. And I know Mayor Carter is passionate about, which is a modern major city needs to be denser, it needs to be more efficient, it needs to have good transportation options. You need to put people closer to the stuff they have to use. And you need to support like the folks who need it most, like all the stuff the city has done with the inheritance fund to help folks who have been impacted by, of old Rondo get a chance to actually get into home ownership and build some generational wealth. The college savings account, even the health savings, health debt, the medical debt piece is all about finding ways to leverage local tools because cities actually don't always have the same abilities to impact things you think they can. And so, it's an interesting mayor's race. It's been, even the last time he ran, I don't think there were really any active challengers. And so I never mind there being active debate in these campaigns. I mean, being the mayor of a big city is a big deal. Like it matters who it is. It's a very big deal. I'm happy there's debate and discussion going on, but I also think there's nothing that I see St. Paul struggling with that is unique to St. Paul. Like I think major cities across the country are dealing with the same stuff.
Yeah, I think the same thing about Minneapolis a lot of time. If I put on my nuanced hat, I could excuse all of the troubles of Minneapolis and not try to place blame on one side or the other. But like if
Right.
I'm looking to place blame, I would place blame on the strong mayor. But I think Fry has like weaseled out, because nuanced conversations about like the troubles the city faces, those are hard, and not most people will not understand them. And so you get a nemesis. You get yourself a nemesis, and you can confuse people about who actually has the most power in a city to affect these things.
Right. Right.
Let's see, what else was I going to ask you? Did you enjoy your time as a interim city council member? Any lessons learned?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, I think maybe more than any, or maybe more than some interim folks, like really, really knew what I was in for. Like I know most of the current members, or knew of them, like not all of them super well, but like I knew people's working styles, I knew people's priorities, I knew how City Hall worked. It was funny having to do the stuff at the table, when you're an aide or you're a lobbyist or you're an advocate, and you're always talking to an elected official and saying like, oh, why don't we just do this? Why don't you do that? Can you do that? Can you do this? The only thing I've never had to do is be the person at the table. And that part was pretty humbling. My first couple meetings were embarrassingly bumbly and like misspeaking and being more nervous than I thought I would be. But
Really?
I mean, yeah, I just because it's, you're up there and all of 10 people are in the room, but it still feels like a big deal somehow. But I really loved it. I mean, like there's no level of government where the impact is more tangible and more tactile. Like I couldn't believe how tangible and real it felt, even just in the 5 months to be back at City Hall and working on local issues. Like the fact that, if there's speeding on a street, you can literally talk to the police and see if we can get some mitigation tactics put in immediately. And all of a sudden that day they're up. When a family needs help, or unfortunately when folks were picked up by ICE, it's like the scariest, most stressful, most angering thing. But you're the only level of government that's going to be talking directly to them. When myself and Jenny Nelson, the Ward 4 legislative aide, are sitting in a family's living room talking to two women whose husbands were taken and very wrongfully, like quickly deported, had no right to a hearing, everything was waived, no process was followed. That's terrifying and it's infuriating, but you're also the only level of government that's going to be sitting in that living room with those mothers, where their kids are running around, kids are having fun, they're still living their life. And so I think the local stuff is just so important, and it's why nerds like you and me focus so much on it, because you can have a direct impact in how your city government runs and how your community runs. And being the person to be able to do that is such an honor, and it's so cool. Like even when it's frustrating, it's still fun and it's still impactful. So yeah, I loved it. I couldn't believe how hard it was to leave when I left. I couldn't believe how much I like right when I got home.
You could have just tried to get on the ballot. You could have been one of those people. I know I'm not allowed to do this, and I said I wouldn't, but I'm running. I love this too much.
It wasn't hard to leave because I was no longer council member. Like it wasn't because I missed being the member. It's because I'm not at City Hall anymore. Like no one, I'm not working on city stuff anymore. I'm not working with Jenny and Kristen anymore. I'm not working with Sarah and Rebecca and Shaniqua and Anika and all these people anymore, and Nelsie. And it's just that I forgot. The only thing I didn't prepare for is how much I would miss leaving City Hall. Like I was only there for 5 months and then I'm gone and no one thinks about me at all. And it's just like, yep, I'm gone.
We still think of you. Do the mean emails stick with you? Do the accusations stick with you? What was the meanest thing somebody accused you of while in your short tenure as council member?
Oh, I think there was some really good ones. We need to Kristen Kojal, who's the executive assistant in Ward 4, I think has a good memory for all of them. I think swamp creature was thrown around.
You were called a swamp creature?
Oh, way worse than that. But that's the one that sticks in my head. I mean, I think people really, I posted this when I did my really long post about the Ward 4 special election. Because, I personally was supporting Molly Coleman. I think she's going to be absolutely phenomenal. Anyone who watched her episode with you I think saw exactly the type of elected official she'll be, how thoughtful she is, how strategic she is. She has less than zero ego. I mean, like, she has the least ego I've ever seen in a candidate or elected official. It's not even close. Like, maybe Russ Stark is second, like our former Ward 4 council member. But she'll be so, so good. But yeah, oh, I think people don't understand. I posted about it. People have no idea like the level of vitriol city council members get in like progressive cities. I mean, really, really brutal stuff. And the thing is, cities are built, cities historically have responded to that and let people with that vitriol get what they want. And the
Right.
problem is, then you're literally telling them that that's how they should act. You're affirming the way they're acting. And the thing I've always been really proud of is I'm always going to weigh a situation based on how it impacts the ward and how it impacts the city. And if a certain policy decision is landing the right way citywide, and it's landing the right way generally across the ward, someone being angry doesn't change that. You know, someone being really upset, and people are allowed to be upset, like they should be upset if they're disagreeing with something. But we dealt with it with new 6-unit properties going in Merriam Park. We recently changed our city zoning to allow up to 4 units, but actually we allowed density bonuses up to 6 units. And one of the only places where rental demand is high enough, where even in times of high interest rates, rental housing can be built, is around St. Thomas. And so around St. Thomas, a bunch of these, and I did a piece in Streets MN about this, a bunch of 6-unit buildings are being proposed where formerly we used to have single family homes. And the thing is, from a citywide perspective, that's a slam dunk objective win to add density, to add more housing, to add to the property tax base, all of these things. But if you live right next door to 2 single family homes and all of a sudden now there's 2 6-unit apartment buildings, is it insane that that person might complain or they might be upset? I don't think it's insane. Like, I think it's somewhat typical. Like, that's a dramatic change. But the truth is, you can't set citywide policy, you know, based on, you have to set it for the whole community, and you have to set it
Right.
for the property tax base and the 50-year goals, 100-year goals. So that was the stuff that was probably most intense, other than, of course, the housing votes that I took in like my first week. That was pretty intense too, but that's so long ago now I don't even know if I remember most of it. But yeah, it gets pretty intense.
Your time at St. Paul City Hall goes back pre-COVID, right? It's hard to believe pre-COVID is so long ago now.
Yeah, I did 3 years as Mitra Jalali's legislative aide, and coincidentally, it was basically 18 months pre-shutdown and 18 months of shutdown. So it's basically half and half.
Uh, have people gotten angrier? Have people gotten angrier at local government like in that time?
It's possible. I mean, people were pretty mad back then too. I mean, I Ward 4 has some pockets of folks who uh are pretty privileged, like pretty comfortable, and they're sort of used to having the neighborhood the way they want it. And so for a lot of the change to be happening in a place where people are pretty comfortable with the way things are, that's where a lot of the anger comes from, because the delta is so big versus like a neighborhood like Midway where I live. That's actually, a lot of people self-select to live in that neighborhood because they like change and they like the fact that new things are coming in. They like the fact that there's new transit options. And so if you're someone that sort of sees the benefit in these changes, you're naturally going to be happy when it's happening. And if you're someone who was perfectly happy living your life the other way, then you're going to be upset. I do think there used to be a lot more in-person events, and I will tell you, I've been booed and hissed and screamed at in-person events too. But I do think the fact that more things are virtual and there are fewer in-person events does mean that if people want to be really cruel and want to be really mean, they can do it behind their screen. And so that is true. Like, there's plenty of times where I meet someone where I meet them in person and we have a perfectly normal conversation. And then I remember that they were the person that sent like the most heinous email I've ever seen in my entire life. So that does happen, where you meet someone and they're sort of less brave when they're talking to you face to face, but then when they send an email, they'll just eviscerate you. That definitely is typical.
I think what keeps you safe as a council member at in-person events is being a white guy. That's what I find is protective.
It is funny. I mean, it's absolutely an insanely real privilege to be a big goony white guy. I mean, like that's just objectively true. But it is funny too. I mentioned people being a little less brave in person, but the truth is you would not believe the stuff that people like have said to my face. I mean, they've definitely said worse.
I believe it.
They definitely said way worse stuff to Mitra. I mean, like when I was staffing Mitra, the level of just like blindly horrendously racist stuff that people said was insane. And even to the point where she was like shocked at times. Like she's had to experience it her whole life, but it is absolutely crazy. I think people see cities like St. Paul, Minneapolis, and they think, oh, it's this like lefty, everyone always agrees and everyone's a Democrat and whatever. And that's just not the way it feels when you're working local issues. Like it's just, that's not the reality. Like it does not feel sunshine and rainbows all day for sure.
It's true. We're not all Democrats here. We have two political parties. Definitely.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I will say it is funny because like in St. Paul, when every time a presidential election happens or a governor's election happens, once in a while the Pioneer Press or someone will do a piece or NPR will do a piece where they literally map out in places like Minneapolis and St. Paul where Republicans live, because there are Republicans who live in St. Paul. St. Paul is like 15, 18, 20% Republican. And they do tend to live in certain areas. And so I don't think people should be, or I should say it this way. I would encourage people to look at those maps because when you see the way local discourse happens, it shouldn't be surprising when you see a more conservative bend in certain parts of the community. And like most of our issues are technically nonpartisan. All of our races are technically nonpartisan. All of that stuff is true. But it just having an awareness of like where our most conservative residents live is helpful to process the way these discussions happen.
Well, Matt Privratsky, thank you for joining me on this St. Paul Question 1 Administrative Citations edition of the Wedge Live podcast.
There's multiple folks who have written about this. I believe Naomi Kritzer already wrote about this. There's been some coverage about it. But yeah, if anyone is listening or watching this, make sure you message at least one other person in St. Paul and say, hey, City Question 1, Administrative Citations, super straightforward, vote yes. Let's make sure we can enforce our most basic laws in a normal way.
Unless you enjoy living in a libertarian Mad Max free-for-all killing field.
That's right. That's the second text you send. Yeah.
You vote no if that's what you want to live. If that's how you want to live.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You took the words right out of my mouth, John.
Mm-hmm. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.